Hello, ladies and gents. Hagbard here in the Leaf Erikson, checking out a video from the group Maz and Juan Strike Back, a title I'm sure Kevin Smith just loves you guys borrowing to spread this regressive sophistry. The subtitle was Islamophobia and Racism. Now, before we even start this, I'm gonna have to assume they're about to spend 20 minutes of my life trying to erroneously interweave the concepts of Islamophobia, a word created by fascists used by cowards to manipulate morons, a quote from Andrew Cummings, and racism, which I'm sure we all know is just prejudice, discrimination, antagonism directed towards someone of a different race. I will now immediately clear up the whole issue in one sentence, which takes them almost 20 minutes. Islam is not a race. It is a fucked up ideology not dissimilar to the absolute worst fundamentalist understanding of the already abhorrent Abrahamic traditions. Shall we proceed with the aforementioned in mind? Well, this looks positively hip and jiggy. Or are we not saying that anymore? On fleek?
Hey everyone, we're here with author and journalist Rula Jibril talking about religion, feminism, and identity. Rula, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Rula,
Well, I understand introducing her first, but what? I get nothing here, Maz?
you're one of the few Muslim women and Arab women who's on mainstream news channels like CNN, MSNBC, and even TV shows like Bill Maher.
That sounds like the very definition of oppression. You must have had it hard.
What are some of the misconceptions or preconceived notions you come across being a woman in such circumstances?
I started actually my career in Italy, and I was invited as a guest after writing an op-ed. And I think Italians, and especially Europeans, they like what you have to say. I think it's different in America. It's more about visual. So I think, and I am sure about that I was hired on television after I wrote many op-eds and books, and I had a long career in Europe and in the Middle East because of the way I look.
Yes, and I'm sure it had nothing to do at all with the long and colorful career you just tried to wave off.
Simply, and I'm not delusional about it.
You're delusional about a lot, dear.
I think after the Arab Spring, they wanted a nice Arab girl to badmouth Arab regimes. And then when they realized what I have really to say, which Israel, American foreign policy, the racism in America, I think they were horrified a little bit.
Rightfully so. You just spouted the most ridiculous garbage I've ever heard. Racism in America is the cause for Assad bombing the Kurds? Or the rampant FGM that exists? Already you're off your rocker.
And they start putting on me their own racism, which like, oh, you must be biased because you're ethnically Palestinian, but you're Israeli citizen. So that you must be confused about who are the bad guys and the good guys.
That's easy. The bad guys use civilian human shields, then blame the enemy for the casualties.
And I think when you start clarifying and talking about details and nuances, herewith things get tricky.
So when you go on a show like Bill Maher, they actually usually ask you to speak for Islam or be a Muslim woman speaking in these circumstances. You don't say what they're expecting. What kind of answers are they looking for, and what prejudices or biases do they have looking at this issue which don't correspond with reality?
Objection? For fuck's sake, man. Even a program like Bill Maher, no one leads a questioner that hard. I'm sure she's found her place in the script by now, lad. Ease up.
Bill never invited me to speak about Islam and Muslims. It happened to be part of the conversation, but I was actually invited. And if you notice, who does he invite to speak about Islam and Muslims? Anti-Muslims,
non-Muslims,
and non-Muslims, and absolutely Islamophobes.
There's no such thing as Islamophobia, dear, and being anti-Muslim for the time being is simply pragmatic self-preservation.
He never invited people seriously to talk about Islam. It happened that he mentioned it, and some people are there that happen not to agree with him. And then it's like, oh, you're here to speak about Islam. I was invited to speak about Ebola when I go to Bill Maher. And they make sure that they actually call you before, and they tell you, oh, we're speaking about this, that. And then he says something that I think he didn't think of, and then here the conversation ensues.
No, he baited you and you fell into screaming for special rights for Muslims. I'll link this clip that she's talking about. She doesn't come off looking good. She comes off as someone not too fond of free speech or criticism of Islam. I mean, shocking, right? She's now going to chafe the missile of reason with straw man first, mischaracterizations next, and attacks on his character with some shit sprinkling to boot. I mean, this woman is a deceitful monster.
But basically, his idea is I lecture about what Islam is and how horrible these people are and how all of Islam is ISIS and ISIS is Islam and the same rhetoric. And if you disagree with him, then, and if you're a woman, I would add, then Bill's side will come out, which is, I think, his confusion about the women that he meets at the Playboy Mansion and the women that he meets in the studio. So if a woman disagrees with him and she happens to be also black, she's the type of people that he loves to date, then that's confusing to him.
You're bordering on libel here and already going to get worse.
My father was Muslim. He worked, and he's a Sufi. I am a Muslim. I was raised as a Muslim. I lived in Jerusalem, 200 meters from the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
So relatively safe and comfortable in Israel then.
That was my experience in Islam. It was an experience of actually where you talk about the principles, which is protecting property, protecting life.
Sure, Muslim property and Muslim life.
Our neighbors were Christians. My own mother, her mother was Christian. So we never had an issue like the Saudis have with women's rights or human rights. So it's a different kind of Islam.
You're welcome from Israel.
So tell us about you, like growing up. Your father was Nigerian, I believe?
My father was Nigerian, and they came in the beginning of the century to Jerusalem, Al-Quds they used to call it, and they stayed there. And my father and my mother was from Haifa, my father was from Jerusalem. We grew up in Jerusalem. My father, he was a guard, and in his free time as a Sufi, he believed in giving back to the community, so he built, together with all the people that used to live in our neighborhood, the gardens. And after, when he was a guard, he would tell us about the attempts of extremists to destroy the Aqsa Mosque and rebuild the Third Temple. And they managed to actually plant bombs in the 80s. They were arrested, these Jewish extremists, they were put in jail, and they were pardoned a year after.
Liar. Liar by the worst measure. Liar by combining the truth with your fantasy. First, let's look at the fact that you had to go back to 1983 and a failed bombing attempt, for which they were charged with life imprisonment, and they were only pardoned during a presidential regime change 7 years later.
And so you grew up in Jerusalem, and then you moved to Italy to go to school, and you studied broadcast journalism. That's how you got into journalism.
Yes.
That was in Italy.
Yes.
And you were a TV host in Italy for many years, I think, as well, too, right?
Yes. I read the news for 5 years. I had my own TV show about politics and international affairs, interviewing everybody. I remember interviewing even Prime Minister then Berlusconi.
Once again, it sounds like those evil, racist Europeans were just so very oppressive to her, no? Don't worry, she will get around to quietly ignoring the compliments she's paid Europe before and proceed to explain how racist Europe is too. Because Saudi Arabia is so fucking inclusive.
About the Iraqi war, his support, not support. He said he never supported the war. But then he made a mistake where he said that he had a meeting with George W. Bush way before the United Nations resolution or anything, where he told him that he's going after Saddam Hussein. Immediately after
Bush
September
told
11th.
Berlusconi that he was going to go after Saddam Hussein.
Yes, immediately after, in the aftermath of September 11th. So that made it clear to all of us that the Iraqi war was already planned for in the aftermath of September 11th, if not before, because if you remember, Bush was in the G7 in Geneva in July 2011, and his speech was the axis of evil: Iran, Iraq, North Korea.
Look, Bush was a moron that pushed an unnecessary war for his own agenda, which was money. He gave no fucks about Islam at all.
So I just got back from Rome a few months ago or whatever. One of the things I noticed, like driving around Rome and whatnot, is that all the people who are cleaning the windows on the car, or the people who are selling the selfie sticks and whatnot, they're all brown people, and a lot of them are Pakistani and Indian.
It's shocking that the people predominantly working street-level, uncarded jobs were immigrants or children of immigrants. Are you even familiar how these markets work?
I think. What was it like growing up? Where in Rome did you grow up, or in Italy?
Well, I studied in Bologna, and I moved to the television. I was invited as a guest, as I said, and I think when I arrived there, the producer was looking for me, and he said, "Where is that journalist?" I mean, we're waiting for her. And I said, "I think you're talking about me," and I was wearing a white Armani suit, and he was shocked. He said, "Oh, I thought you would be wearing a veil." And I said, "What made you think that? I mean, you read an article. How do you imagine that?" He said, "Oh, the name." I thought, you know.
So they have really deeply ingrained stereotypes of what they expect a Muslim woman to look like.
These stereotypes exist because you don't represent the majority, but the minority. I mean, you get that, right? Most Muslim majority countries don't embrace Western values. You have to know that.
Absolutely. And the worst part is they really think that Muslim women are submissive, that are not used to speak their minds, and the men are ruling their lives. He doesn't understand that in my neighborhood in East Jerusalem, women are absolutely dominant and ruling the whole neighborhood. I mean,
So the minority of a minority in the minority-ruled country of Israel, which ensures women's rights and freedoms by rule of law, enjoy those rights and freedoms. How does this pertain to Sharia exactly? Note she's not going to bring up that, how women were treated may have contributed to her mother's suicide, or, how her imam father gave her up because daughters are culturally a burden. Of course not. That would be inconvenient. But now you're going to throw the first intifada at us, right?
I remember during the first intifada, soldiers would come and arrest kids. And the women would not let them get away with it. So they will come at night, and all of us are dark, and they would come out and would start actually hassling the soldiers. And the soldiers and the head of the police came to the neighborhood and asked Al-Mukhtar, which is the head of the neighborhood, and said, "Can you please rein these women and talk to them?" And the head of the neighborhood said, "I'm scared of them. You talk to them."
Translation: the Palestinians used women to stop the arrests of children, or 15-year-old firebombing suspects, because they knew the IDF wouldn't knowingly harm women. Otherwise, the women's movement during the Intifada was as support for rock throwers and basic first aid, like women have done for a long time during conflicts.
So there's an identity to these women that I don't think it's clear in the West. They really think that we are submissive.
So semi-secularized Palestinian Muslim women represent all women under Islam everywhere. What ISIS and Saudi Arabia do is not representative of women and Islam. Gotcha, you dishonest son of...
Black and brown women in this country as well. I mean, it's not an accident that the leaders or the intellectual founders of the Black Lives Matter movement were all women of color.
Juan, are you implying that these people's actions are implicitly reliant on their skin tone and sex? And further, how is this related even remotely to Palestine? Also, I would be weary of calling anything about the BLM movement intellectual. It's founded by two Pan-African obsessed people and one individual that thinks Assata Shakur is a hero.
And a few months ago during the Black Lives Matter convention in Cincinnati, or pardon me, in Cleveland, they arrested a 14-year-old boy, and it was black women on the street saying, let this boy go and whatnot.
Oh yeah, the 14-year-old drunk kid that rioters attacked cops over because feels?
Absolutely.
And a lot of people who are not people of color have this one-dimensional view, not only of people of color, but of women.
Great way to make that sweeping generalization. People who are not people of color. Good job carefully not saying, white people be like this. So by this guy's quote, white people see all non-whites and women especially as stereotypes. Yet somehow you're not being a bigoted piece of shit right now, right?
They turn into caricatures. A Muslim woman, she must be wearing a veil. A black woman,
absolutely,
she must be angry and pissed off all the time.
We are trying to be reasonable. We are reasonable. We are trying. We're gonna let you on the mic. We are going to give you.
I wonder where that came from.
It's not
Really
the worst. It's like you
possible
always dressed like
interpretation.
this in life, really? What does your father think that you have a Jewish husband? So I get all these questions, and I get even patronized on national television, on CNN, by Rabbi Shmuley, who
So a Jewish guy then.
said, oh, in your own country, your family would kill you because you conduct this liberal lifestyle.
She admits that these kind of things are true and similar things on Bill Maher. She would be killed in Gaza. So would a homosexual. But here she's going to throw some countries out that are slightly more lax. Slightly. I mean, I'll just let Hitchens talk about Iraq real quick.
You can actually get to see one of the most chilling, annihilatingly chilling, actually, videos ever made in the 20th century. It shows the moment at which Saddam Hussein, the actual moment at which Saddam Hussein seized power in Iraq for himself. We don't have that moment in Germany. We don't have that moment in Russia. We don't know we know what happened after the Kirov assassination in Leningrad and the opportunity it gave to Stalin to seize supreme power. We know roughly what happened in the night of the long knives, when Adolf Hitler realized that he could massacre every rival of his, not just in German politics, but within his own party, which is always the crucial thing. But with Iraq, we do have the actual moment, and you see it. There's the Central Committee of the Ba'ath Party, perhaps 100 people, are sitting in a very formal array in a conference room. And Saddam Hussein is chairing them from a podium, smoking a large cigar. And suddenly, without warning to anyone, in is dragged between two guards and in chains a broken man, a man who is obviously physically and mentally been utterly destroyed. His personality has been evacuated. And prodded a bit, he stumbles through a confession that implicates himself and others in a plot to destroy the Iraqi Republic, to remove the regime of the Ba'ath Party, and to ruin the Iraqi revolution, the counter-revolution, in other words. He says the regime behind it is the Syrian regime. It could have been anybody. It could have been international Zionism. It could have been anything you like, but he actually implicates, in this case, the Syrian Ba'ath Party rivals. Having confessed for himself and having begged to be executed for his crimes, having been reduced to a state of complete abjection, the man then says, the following members of this Central Committee were with me in this plot, and he begins to read out their names. Slowly. And as this happens, you can see it, the guards move every time a name is mentioned, and they grab the member of the Central Committee and lead him out of the door. And after about a dozen of these, there's panic. Sheer animal panic starts to spread among those who haven't yet been named. And in the hope that they're not going to be, they start screaming and jumping up and saying, "Glory to Saddam Hussein, our leader, all praise to him, the sun, the moon, the stars of Iraq," praying that it won't be them who are called next. Nothing makes any difference. The harvest just goes on randomly. They're taken off the chessboard and taken out until half of them are gone, and the rest are just limp and done for and almost dying with relief that it wasn't them. It's the most extraordinary live show of a real, for keeps, political purge that you'll ever see. And then there's the second half, which has been seen by much fewer people and was not shown on PBS, where the surviving half are told to go out in the yard and are given guns and are told to shoot the convicted half. Now they're in the plot. Now they are cemented to the leadership. Now, Kanan Nakir in his book says correctly, he says, Hitler wouldn't have thought of that. Stalin didn't even think of that, and he thought about these things a lot, about how to get one member of the Central Committee to betray another member and keep them all guessing so that you're the ultimate beneficiary. But this is that added little touch of sadomasochistic genius. This is the adding of the Godfather and the Soprano to the mixture of Nazism and Stalinism that was, in fact, the birth of Ba'athist ideology to begin with, in case you don't know or haven't studied it. The Iraqi Ba'ath Socialist Party was modeled in large part on admiration for European National Socialist and fascist movements. Hoped to emulate them, especially in their nationalism against the West. But mutated by Saddam Hussein, it became also one that very, very much admired. He had a great admiration for and grew a special moustache in admiration of the work of Joseph Vissarionovich Dugiashvili, the great Georgian known to us historically as Stalin. So you had in modern Iraq a regime in our own time that was openly and directly modeled upon the two most extreme examples of European totalitarianism.
It does not understand the Middle East. It doesn't understand that in Egypt, in Syria, before the civil war, even in Iraq, before the Iraqi war, absolutely women were so secular. In Iraq, the majority of the women were not only secular, they were thriving in their fields, whether in academia, in art.
I think we just saw an example of the kind of polite extremism she's fine with.
In Lebanon, in Palestine, all of these areas. What changed? Western intervention. Absolutely empowered radicals and extremists. But they don't want to see that.
And you don't want to see that Islam has supported dictator after brutal dictator, year after bloody year.
They want to see that, no, it's because of Islam. Islam existed there for centuries. Never had this kind of, I would say, degeneration.
You disingenuous harpy!
Until the first ISIS state, which I consider Saudi Arabia, established itself. And it happened to be our ally, but we don't mention that.
And it was established by the British, too, with the help of the British.
Absolutely, absolutely. But nobody today questions Saudi conduct.
Bullshit. Massive bullshit. Saudi Arabia is part of this for all of us that criticize Islam, and Islam is part of the Saudi regime. None of us have denied that.
For us, it's ISIS. But ISIS has the ideological root and connection with Saudi Arabia. They behead more people. They gave us Al-Qaeda and 15 of the 19 hijackers. But they're still our allies.
Nice attempt to shame me, but I condemn the Saudis too, so.
You know, one thing I noticed, because when you watch your media appearances, a lot of times people seem taken aback because they have these stereotypes of Muslim women, and then, you know, you're aggressive and you're intelligent. And
No, she's shrill and illogical. She just kicks up dirt to muddy the waters and attempts to use cherry-picked examples in emotional response.
they're sort of like aghast by us. I saw the interview with you and Naftali Bennett, who's like a very fascist Israeli, you know, politician. He was patronizing, and he was just sort of, he doesn't know what to do with this. And Bill Maher, even, who's a liberal chauvinist, I wouldn't say he's a fascist in any way.
Really? Liberal chauvinist, but not a fascist. Well, good. It's just as long as Maz approves. I mean, I know how you Muslims just need to be unquestionably taken for your word.
But he's definitely a chauvinist. They don't know how to slot someone who doesn't fit into their stereotypes into certain buckets. So
because this is what, and I feel terrible to say this.
But you're gonna shit spread anyway.
American media established an image of Arab Muslims after September 11, and paved the way to the Iraqi war. They never questioned the administration. They abrogated their responsibility on this, and now we are fine to deal with the result and the consequences of this.
So the West provided all that terrible stuff actually happening to write that narrative, right? We just made it up then. Just anything but even a modicum of responsibility to the people actually doing terrible things on the ground in Arab countries.
They're not used to this kind of
no, they're not.
Of journalism. They're not used to somebody speaking their mind, because
that would be because that's not journalism. It's opinion piece at best and fucking propaganda at worst.
Everything that was on television had to be, I mean, I watched regime state television in the Arab world. I used to watch these interviews and be horrified. It's like, do I need to put up with this? But I didn't come to America to think that the homeland of free speech and think that I have to confirm my views.
Yeah, this free speech advocate says free speech doesn't apply when criticizing or offending people. So, yeah, real intellectually fucking honest.
I'm not doing this.
So talk to us about, because you wrote a book about the French immigrant experience. Talk to us about that, because I lived in France
That's
for a while.
actually, it's an incredible experience.
And France is a very unique place when it comes
Yes.
to the Muslim European experience, or the
Absolutely.
European Muslim.
But it's also the homeland of the cultural revolution in Europe started in France. We used to read Rousseau and Victor Hugo, who used to say, you open a school, you close a jail. And all of these ideals of fraternité, equality, fraternity, and liberty.
Now, this is the Europe that she was expounding the virtues of earlier that has treated her well her entire life and career. But now the bus is here and she's tossing you under.
Yeah.
But they forgot to add, and I think this is the unspoken language, that this is for the white Christian. So Europe is a white Christian club.
Uganda is a black Christian club. Discuss.
That you need to be part of. If you belong to any other minority, even if you are born there since 3 generations, it does not matter.
How would you know that, really? You're a first-generation immigrant.
They will keep asking you, where do you come from? And it's confusing for a young mind, and they're 16, 14. So they bring them in, put them in the suburbs.
Those suburbs sound awful.
I would say in the 30s. And since then, they've been living in the suburbs. So you had stars like Zidane or like Thierry Henry and other people who were born in the suburbs, and they kept being called names in the fields while they are playing soccer simply because of their skin tone.
I remember I had a friend in France a few years ago, and she did not speak Arabic, but she was of Algerian descent. And she would say, I don't feel French because they don't treat me as if they ask you when are you going home or where are you from. But in Algeria, they don't feel Algerian either because the Algerians don't see you as French.
So then Algeria is equally culpable in their racism, right? No, of course not.
So really you have no home, and then you have a vacuum in your identity. And she said something very poignant. She said that for me, home is being on a plane because there's not really any country that I feel like I fit in.
Aside from that being an incredibly specific example for you to use, it's also the typical second-generation immigrant story.
I mean, it's really a sad story of lost generation, because what they are denied, these millions of people. I mean, we have 4 million in France. You had almost 3.5 million Turks in Germany. You had hundreds of thousands in Italy. You had hundreds of thousands in Spain. And this generation of European Muslims are denied a sense of belonging. And what European politicians don't understand.
So you, the apparently superior Muslim culture, are now going to tell we poor, impoverished Westerners what we need to understand? Really? Then you're going to follow it up with thinly veiled threats to do as we say or risk the radicalization otherwise? Which already happens because your book is poison?
This will absolutely, it's easier for anybody to exploit them and radicalize them and alienate them against the homeland. So when we look at the American experience of Muslims, they are first and foremost Muslims.
At their behest, by their behavior, by forming insular communities, conservative, insular, restrictive communities.
And we were talking about this before. When President Obama gave that speech in Cairo in 2009, what was the speech about? It wasn't about what he said. Thousands of people, I would say millions, were listening to the speech in Cairo. I was in Cairo and I was in a cab, and the cab driver, who was in his 60s, he said, Miss, Obama has our skin tone, exactly our skin tone. His father is Muslim like the majority of us. He can be the president of his country and we cannot even vote. This is what people in the Middle East feel.
Obsessed with race and religious orientations?
Obama's speech was, the symbolism of that speech was minority rights is absolutely a weapon against extremism. But not only that, it's about equality and being citizen in the 21st century. You're equal citizen regardless where you come from. So the European value system has to re-examine itself.
No, absolutely not. You deceitful fucking God, no! You wingnut fucks need to reevaluate what you believe in. Mein Kampf is the #1 book translated into Arabic and shipped to Turkey. Islamism is the new Nazism. You have equality, but are demanding superiority. No.
Because they did already a mistake in the 20s, 30s, 40s towards their own citizens who were Jews. Today, Muslims are the new Jews in Europe, and there's a huge problem with that.
And but that's part of the thing too. Like if you go to Europe, and I've obviously lived there for a while.
You were there during the riots, weren't you, in France?
On the French riots in 2004 or 2005, which, by the way, kicked off because of police violence.
Yes.
That's a pattern that you see consistent in all these things. But when you talk to white Europeans, there is this arrogance that they think they're somehow more progressive on these issues when you juxtapose it with America. But then I have to say to you, in Paris or in France, almost 85% of the people who are in French prisons are black and brown.
Well, luckily, one couldn't possibly reverse correlate that to most offenders in France must be black or brown because that might be damaging.
It also shows that
that is gigantically, that's so much more than even the rates here in this country.
Listen carefully, they are implying that there should be affirmative action somehow in the political process, especially for the benefit of this small group of people sitting right here. Picture 3 white people having the same kind of discussion. Exactly.
Right.
But shows them the data about politics and inclusion in I would say politics. How many French politicians that have our skin tone, or even Muslims, or belong to a different ethnic group? Really? Almost nothing. Less than 0.000. Now everybody is proud that the French mayor, the Paris mayor is from Algerian, and everybody is proud of that. But this is nothing compared to the 4 million people. Nothing compared to the 4 million people.
It would never be enough.
I think representation is a key to more integration, so they can be involved in policy makings and other things.
But all right, let's go back to France for a second, because I love France, even though France is like a nasty-ass racist place sometimes. The Justice Minister of France is a black woman, yes? She was called a monkey by one of her colleagues who insulted her.
Her colleague called her a monkey?
Pardon me, a member of the French Parliament called her a monkey, yes. But you said he was forced to resign, right? Thug.
Well, I talked about an Italian experience. We had the same thing in Italy, where another minister from Africa who had a dark skin tone, she was called all kind of names by people in the street, but also by a political party that is the right-wing, almost fascist political party. One of the leader of that political party, in an interview in 2006 with me on television, national television, live, he said, "I will never answer a question of that black woman," referring to myself. And I said, look, you have 2 choices, either to apologize or I will cut your microphone off.
So what happened to him after that?
I think there was a public uproar, and he was forced to resign 3 days after. But it was the public uproar who could not, as much as racism exists, but I think there's a moment where it becomes so visible that people cannot accept it anymore. And I think it's good when it becomes visible. I love visible, between hidden racism and visible one. Give me the visible one, it's easier to take down.
I agree, you racist. Keep talking.
Yeah, I say that all the time in our own conversations.
Right. Malcolm X said that too. I'd rather live with I'd rather know I'm living with a fox and, live with a fox in sheep's clothing.
Exactly. And I think especially a lot of liberals, talk about Bill Maher, like a lot of liberal Americans in this country.
They don't think they could possibly be racist because they're liberals.
Exactly.
But because I think white people in the West, I think we are born in the West, and he's a man and he's white. He really think that he's above any kind of accusation of being, because he spoke against an Iraqi war, and that's a flag. He needs to think that the world in the 21st century, we're equal citizens. You are allowed to love who you want, to live where you want, to be treated as equal citizen wherever you live, not based on your skin tone. So the revolution that started in France for equality is an endless one.
At least you're admitting that you have no intention of ever stopping this shit.
Never ended. And we'll have to carry this revolution with us on TV stations, because when you're speaking truth, you become a dissident almost, an activist.
They've turned liberalism into like a form of identity politics. The liberalism is all about being self-critical and questioning yourself. When you stop questioning, you said, well, I can't be racist because I have all the answers. Then you become what you're trying to fight against very easily.
But I can't be racist because power plus privilege is racism, so kill all white men. You support that, and then you accuse the liberals of the progressive standpoint. You are fucking Nazis.
Because you can get away with it. The truth is, for many
like in
years, you
America
could
right now,
get
yeah,
away
yeah.
with it. Being racist against an Arab today is like being racist against a Jew in the 30s.
Arabs do not equal Muslims, and Muslims do not equal Arabs. War is not racism. You lying sophists.
And people were fine with it because the normalization of racism in the 30s in Europe was acceptable. Today, the normalization of racism against an Arab, Muslims in this country is normal. It's fine. You can get away with it.
But I think you said a few moments ago, like, this struggle continues. This fight will always go on. It manifests itself in different ways. But
the arch of history always been towards justice.
you think that?
I know that.
Really?
I know that for sure.
That's great. I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he used that line in his book too, because that's a favorite quote from Barack Obama.
But it's...
You really think, sometimes I think
I
it
know
doesn't.
that. Look at the 90s and the 80s, South Africa and Rwanda. Look at the 40s in Europe or the 30s in Europe. Look at Europe today. They fought each other, killed millions of their own citizens. Then they negotiated on an economic basis. France had coal, Germany had steel. They aligned themselves and they created the most eloquent idea, which is European Union, nation states, where you can cross borders. You can drive from Italy today to France or to Germany. Nobody's stopping you at the border.
Until droves of Muslims flooded in demanding welfare status and Sharia. Until then, you mean?
Nobody questioning you.
Yeah, but who's benefiting from that, though? It's like white Europeans who are mostly benefiting from that.
That's because they mostly did that. It is not their responsibility to just give it to you because you've decided you want it now that it's been built. They have children's stories for this. You didn't help make the bread.
But you know what? History goes forward, backwards, and sideways sometimes.
What?
But always push forward, because this is a struggle that nation needs to go through in order to improve themselves and evolve.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah. Rula, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
it's so
been a
nice to
pleasure.
be sitting in one studio with 3 brown people. I mean, I love it. I love it. Thank you. You made me feel home today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, it's our honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Funny, that last bit sounded like you only feel at home surrounded by black and brown faces, but hey, who am I to judge? I do find it interesting that these demands are made only of predominantly white countries, though. No one's trying to make Nigeria or China more diverse, are they? I mean, I think that's interesting. And I know it was long and frustrating, and I'm sure it took forever to get through, so thanks for getting through it with me. I'll see y'all for the sinking of Pacific Ocean liner. I will not call him Superliner.